Case 1, JoAnn Cunningham. April 15, 2019, McHenry County Circuit Court, Crystal Lake, Chicago suburban area, Illinois. There are moments in a criminal investigation when seasoned detectives, men and women who have spent decades in law enforcement, who have reviewed more case files than most people will ever know exist, go completely silent. Not because they have run out of things to say, but because what they are looking at has reached past every professional wall they have ever built and struck something deeply human inside them. The investigation into the disappearance and death of 5-year-old Andrew Freund, known to everyone who loved him simply as AJ, was one of those moments. It was a case that shook McHenry County to its foundation, rippled through the entire state of Illinois, and forced communities across the country to confront a question that no one wants to sit with for very long. How does a child vanish from inside his own home? And how does the person who carried him into this world become the person investigators ultimately have to look at hardest? Crystal Lake, Illinois is a quiet, tree-lined suburban community located approximately 45 miles northwest of downtown Chicago. It sits within McHenry County, part of the broader Chicago metropolitan area, where families raise children in modest homes with front yards, where school buses make their rounds every weekday morning, and where the kind of tragedy that would define April of 2019 felt, to most of its residents, like something that belonged in a different kind of place. A bigger city, maybe. Somewhere harder, somewhere colder. Not here. Not in Crystal Lake. AJ Freund was born on November 26, 2013. He was a small boy with an easy smile, the kind of child whose photograph, when it circulated through social media and news broadcasts during the search that followed his reported disappearance, stopped people mid-scroll. There was something in his expression, something open and trusting, that made it impossible to look away. He was 5 years old. He was someone's son. He deserved everything a childhood is supposed to hold. But AJ's early years were not defined by safety and stability. Court records and investigative documents would later reveal that the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, the agency responsible for protecting at-risk children across the state, known as DCFS, had been in contact with AJ's household on more than 17 separate occasions before the spring of 2019. 17 documented moments of concern. 17 windows through which the system had an opportunity to see what was happening inside that home on Dole Avenue in Crystal Lake. The weight of that number became one of the most painful elements of an already devastating case, and one of the most consequential. AJ lived in that home with his mother, JoAnn Cunningham, and his father, Andrew Freund Sr. Both parents had documented histories involving child welfare concerns. Both had been subjects of prior DCFS inquiries. The household was known to the system. And yet, on April 18, 2019, a Thursday morning, it was JoAnn Cunningham herself who picked up the phone and called Crystal Lake Police to report that her 5-year-old son was missing. She told responding officers that she had checked on AJ in the early morning hours, found his bed empty, searched the house, looked outside, and could not locate him anywhere. Her manner, according to multiple officers who were present during those initial interactions, struck them as unusual. Not the frantic, breathless desperation that a parent typically displays when a child cannot be found, but something more contained, more measured. Something that, even in those first few minutes, caused experienced law enforcement professionals to take a second, closer look. Crystal Lake Police initiated a search immediately. Officers canvassed the surrounding neighborhood block by block. Community members, the kind of people who show up when a child is missing, who make flyers at midnight and knock on strangers' doors, organized their own efforts. AJ's photograph spread across Facebook, Twitter, and local news within hours. People who had never met this boy searched for him because he was a child, and he was gone, and that was enough of a reason. As the search extended past its first day and into its second and third, investigators continued analyzing Cunningham's account and the evidence coming from the home itself. There were inconsistencies in what she had told them. There were details that did not align. Law enforcement sources would later describe the investigative process that followed as painstaking and methodical, the kind of careful, thorough work that eventually builds an undeniable picture even when the truth is being actively concealed. What investigators ultimately established, through physical evidence collected from the home, through witness statements, and through Cunningham's own eventual admissions during the legal proceedings that followed, was this. On April 15, 2019, 3 full days before she reported AJ missing, JoAnn Cunningham had subjected her 5-year-old son to severe physical harm inside their home. Prosecutors established that AJ had been forced into a cold shower, after which he sustained repeated, serious injuries to his head. AJ Freund did not survive. He was 5 years old. He weighed approximately 50 pounds. The little boy with the wide smile and the open, trusting face never had a chance. Rather than seeking emergency medical assistance, rather than calling anyone for help, Cunningham concealed what had occurred. 3 days went by, and then, on April 18th, she called the police, not to confess, but to report a missing child. She sent an entire community searching for a boy she already knew was gone. She watched neighbors make flyers. She observed law enforcement organize search teams. And she said nothing. Investigators eventually located AJ's remains in a shallow grave in a rural area near Woodstock, Illinois, a community just north of Crystal Lake. He had been wrapped in a plastic bag. The discovery confirmed what law enforcement had increasingly come to believe and brought to an abrupt and grievous end the community search that had held on a hope for days. JoAnn Cunningham was taken into custody in April of 2019. Andrew Freund Sr. was also arrested as investigators worked to establish the full scope of each individual's involvement in what had happened and in the concealment that followed. The charges Cunningham faced were among the most serious in the Illinois Criminal Code. The case moved through McHenry County Circuit Court over the months that followed, drawing sustained media attention and an enormous outpouring of public grief and outrage. When the proceedings reached their conclusion in the summer of 2020, Cunningham had entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder. In July of 2020, McHenry County Circuit Court Judge Robert Wilbrandt sentenced JoAnn Cunningham to 35 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, a sentence to be served at 100%, meaning no possibility of early release for good conduct. She will not walk free until she is well into her late 60s. The sentence delivered a measure of legal accountability, but it also opened a broader, more complicated conversation that the state of Illinois and the country has not finished having. How had 17 prior DCFS contacts failed to result in intervention that might have saved AJ's life? Illinois legislators, child advocacy organizations, and child welfare researchers launched thorough examinations of DCFS protocols and practices in the wake of the case. AJ's story became a reference point in policy discussions about caseworker caseloads, mandatory reporting standards, and what structural changes are necessary to make the child welfare system function as it was designed to function. For the people of Crystal Lake, the case left a wound that time has softened but not erased. A foundation established in AJ's memory has supported child safety advocacy work in the years since his death. His name appears in policy documents, in legislative testimony, in the memory of every investigator who worked those days in April. He deserved to grow up. He deserved Monday mornings and summer afternoons and all of the thousands of unremarkable moments that belong to a childhood. The system failed him. The person who should have been his greatest protector became the person who took everything from him. And the community that searched for him in those 3 days carries his name forward as a testament to collective love and as a permanent reminder of collective responsibility. If you have concerns about the welfare of a child in your community, please do not hesitate to act. In Illinois, you can reach the DCFS Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline at 1-800-252-2873. The call is free. The call is confidential. And it could be the one thing that makes the difference. AJ Freund was 5 years old. He mattered. He still does. If this case moved you, if it reminded you why stories like this one must be told and remembered, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support makes this work possible and ensures these children are never forgotten. Case 2. Clarisa Figueroa, April 23, 2019, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There are crimes that confound investigators not because the evidence is difficult to read, but because the deliberateness behind them is almost impossible to process. Cases where a person did not act in a moment of impulse, did not lose control under sudden pressure, did not make a single catastrophic decision in the span of a few seconds, but instead planned, prepared, and executed a course of action over days and weeks with a cold and methodical precision that leaves even the most experienced prosecutors briefly at a loss for words when they first see the full picture assembled in front of them. The case of Clarisa Figueroa is one of those cases. It occupies a category nearly its own, a crime of such calculated and sustained intent against a young mother and her unborn child that it drew national headlines, prompted federal legislative discussions, and permanently altered how the state of Illinois addresses crimes that affect unborn victims. Marlon Ochoa Lopez was 19 years old in the spring of 2019. She was 9 months pregnant with her first child, a son she had already named Giovanni. And by every account, she was a young woman full of expectation, surrounded by family members who adored her, stepping toward one of the most meaningful moments of her life. She was a student. She was a daughter. She was a wife. She was a mother preparing to bring a new life into the world. And on the afternoon of April 23, 2019, she left her home on Chicago's southwest side to visit a woman she had connected with through a Facebook parenting group, a woman who had offered her free baby clothes and newborn supplies. She was never seen alive again. The neighborhood of Scottsdale sits on Chicago's southwest side, a community of brick bungalows and two-flat homes where working families have built their lives for generations. The kind of Chicago neighborhood where people look out for one another and where the pace of daily life is grounded and familiar. The address Marlon traveled to that April afternoon belonged to Clarisa Figueroa, a woman in her 40s who had been active in online parenting communities and had presented herself to Marlon as someone with resources to share and experience to offer. Marlon had no reason to be afraid. She was going to pick up baby clothes. She had told people where she was going. She was 9 months pregnant, and the world, at that moment, felt full of possibility. What Clarisa Figueroa had been planning, investigators would later establish, was something that no one who received her warm and helpful online messages could have anticipated. Figueroa had suffered the loss of a pregnancy and had, according to the prosecution's account of the case, become consumed by a desire to present a newborn child as her own. She had, over the weeks and months preceding April 23rd, been telling people in her life, including her own partner, that she was pregnant. She had constructed an elaborate fiction, and she had decided, in a manner that prosecutors described as premeditated and deliberate, that Marlon Ochoa Lopez and her unborn son would be the means by which she fulfilled that fiction. When Marlon arrived at Figueroa's home on April 23, 2019, she was welcomed inside. What happened within those walls over the course of that afternoon was established through physical evidence, witness testimony, and the legal proceedings that followed. Figueroa, with the assistance of her daughter Desiree Figueroa, who would later face her own serious charges in connection with the events of that day, strangled Marlon Ochoa Lopez with a cable. Marlon lost her life inside that home. She was 19 years old. She was 9 months pregnant. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply trusted a stranger who offered her kindness and arrived at a door she should have been able to walk back out of. Following Marlon's death, Figueroa performed an unauthorized surgical procedure, removing Marlon's unborn son from the womb. She then contacted emergency services, claiming that she herself had just given birth. First responders arrived to find an infant in critical condition. The baby boy, the child Marlon had named Giovanni, was transported to a hospital in grave condition. He survived for a period of weeks, fighting with a strength that moved everyone who knew his story, before ultimately succumbing to the severe injuries he had sustained. He was an infant. He had not yet had a single ordinary day. When investigators began looking more closely at the situation, examining the physical evidence at Figueroa's home, reviewing medical records, speaking with witnesses, the truth of what had happened began to emerge with a clarity that was as undeniable as it was devastating. Clarisa Figueroa and her daughter were arrested. The investigation, led by Chicago Police Department detectives working in coordination with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, was thorough, methodical, and ultimately constructed a case of overwhelming evidentiary strength. The legal proceedings that followed unfolded over several years, reflecting the complexity and gravity of the charges involved. Desiree Figueroa, Clarisa's daughter, resolved her case through a plea agreement. Clarisa Figueroa herself faced trial in Cook County Circuit Court, where prosecutors presented the full weight of the evidence assembled against her, including digital communications, physical evidence from the home, medical findings, and witness testimony that collectively told the story of a crime that had been years in the making. In April of 2024, nearly 5 years after the day Marlon Ochoa Lopez walked through a door she should have been able to walk back out of, Clarisa Figueroa was sentenced to 50 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections for the murder of Marlon Ochoa Lopez. The sentence, handed down in Cook County, represented one of the most significant and closely watched criminal justice outcomes in Chicago in recent years. For Marlon's family, her husband, her parents, the people who loved her and waited for her to come home on the afternoon of April 23, 2019, no sentence can restore what was taken. Their daughter, their granddaughter, the young mother who had spent months preparing for her son's arrival and who deserved to hold him, to raise him, to watch him grow. The grief that Marlon's family has carried since that afternoon in 2019 is the kind of grief that does not have a bottom. But the legal system's response to Clarisa Figueroa's actions was unequivocal. 50 years. A sentence that reflects the severity, the premeditation, and the profound human cost of what she chose to do. It also served as the foundation for continued advocacy. Marlon's law, legislation advancing protections for pregnant women, and stronger penalties for crimes that cause the loss of an unborn child, has been discussed and advanced in the years following her death. Her name, Marlon Ochoa Lopez, became not only a symbol of injustice, but a catalyst for legal change. Marlon was 19 years old. She was 9 months pregnant. She trusted someone who presented themselves as a friend and a helper. She lost her life because of that trust, and so did her son. Their story is told here not to sensationalize their suffering, but to ensure that they are remembered with the full dignity they deserve, and to ensure that the system of accountability that responded to their deaths continues to be strengthened in their honor. If this case has moved you, if you believe Marlon and JoAnn deserve to be remembered, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support keeps these stories alive and ensures that justice is never just a word. Case 3, Andreal Hagler, May 24 through 25, 2022. Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There is a particular kind of grief that settles over a neighborhood when it learns that a child who lived among them, a child who may have played on the same sidewalks, attended the same schools, eaten at the same corner stores, is gone. Not from illness, not from accident, but from a deliberate act of harm carried out in a place where she was supposed to be completely safe. The Uptown neighborhood on Chicago's North Side is one of the city's most culturally layered communities, a place of striking contrasts where longtime residents share blocks with recent arrivals, where community organizations work daily to support families navigating complex circumstances, and where the sudden loss of an 8-year-old girl named Aurionah-Rakii-Karie sent a wave of grief through streets that already knew too much about loss. Aurionah-Rakii-Karie was 8 years old in the late spring of 2022. She was a child, with everything that word implies. A girl who had her whole life arranged in front of her, who had people who cared about her, who had no understanding of the danger she was in or any ability to protect herself from it. She should have been able to count on the adult in her home to be the wall between her and anything that could hurt her. She should have been safe. On the night of May 24th through the early hours of May 25th, 2022, in a residence in Chicago's Uptown neighborhood, Aurionah-Rakii-Karie lost her life. She was 8 years old. The person who caused her death was her mother, Andreal Hagler. Court records and prosecutorial filings that emerged from the Cook County criminal proceedings documented the circumstances surrounding what occurred that night with a precision that made the case against Hagler, ultimately, one that the evidence left very little room to contest. Prosecutors established that on the night in question, Hagler was under the influence of PCP, a powerful and dangerous controlled substance known for its capacity to produce extreme behavioral changes, heightened aggression, and profound disconnection from reality. The prosecution's account described a woman in a state of chemical-induced crisis who, in the grip of that crisis, directed her rage toward her own child. The specific circumstances that investigators and prosecutors identified as the trigger for what Hagler did that night were as heartbreaking as they were senseless. According to court filings, Hagler became enraged over a belief shaped and distorted by the substance she had consumed, that Amariah loved her father more than she loved her mother. That perceived slight, filtered through the lens of impaired judgment and uncontrolled anger, became, in Hagler's distorted state, a justification. Aurionah-Rakii-Karie, 8 years old and completely powerless, paid the price for her mother's unraveling. Hagler deprived Amariah of oxygen using a plastic bag. Amariah did not survive. She was 8 years old. Investigators who responded to the scene and the medical and forensic professionals who subsequently examined the evidence found a case whose facts, once established, spoke with terrible clarity about what had happened in that uptown residence on that late May night. Andreal Hagler was arrested and charged in Cook County with first-degree murder. The case proceeded through the Cook County Circuit Court system over the months and years that followed, a process that involved the careful, thorough examination of the physical evidence, toxicological findings, and witness accounts that formed the evidentiary foundation of the prosecution's case. The gravity of the charge and the nature of the evidence defined the trajectory of the proceedings from the outset. In February of 2025, Andreal Hagler was sentenced in Cook County Circuit Court to 28 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections for the first-degree murder of her daughter, Aurionah-Rakii-Karie. The sentence concluded a legal process that had stretched across nearly 3 years and represented the court's formal acknowledgement of the irreversible harm Hagler's actions had caused. The case also reignited conversations that Chicago's public health and social services communities have been having for years about the intersection of substance use, mental health, and child welfare. PCP, the substance involved in this case, produces a constellation of effects that can include extreme agitation, paranoia, and a complete loss of behavioral inhibition. The presence of a powerful substance like PCP in a home where a child is present represents a child welfare risk that advocates say must be addressed with greater urgency at the community and systemic level. Aurionah-Rakii-Karie's father and extended family have spoken publicly about their grief and about the young girl they lost, a child described as bright, loving, and full of the particular energy that belongs to 8-year-olds who are engaged with the world around them. Her absence is a permanent loss. The 28-year sentence imposed on Andreal Hagler is the legal system's answer. The broader answer, the one that involves communities, support systems, and the structures that exist to identify and intervene in dangerous situations before they become irreversible, belongs to all of us. For anyone in the Chicago area dealing with substance use challenges or seeking mental health support, the Illinois Helpline for Opioids and Other Substances is available at 1-800-228-5858. Help is available. Reaching out is a sign of strength, not weakness. Aurionah-Rakii-Karie was 8 years old. She deserved a full life. She is remembered here with the dignity she deserved and the love her community carries for her still. Please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These stories deserve to be told, and your support ensures they are never forgotten. Case 4, Angela Petrov, April 11, 2013, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. Among the most fundamental expectations that any society holds, across cultures, across generations, across every legal and moral framework human beings have ever constructed, is the expectation that a parent will protect their child. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but at a basic, irreducible level, that when danger appears, the parent will stand between it and the child. That when a small, helpless person who cannot protect themselves needs someone to act, the person who brought them into the world will be that someone. The case of Angela Petrov and the death of 5-month-old Angelina Rodriguez in the West Ridge neighborhood of Chicago's North Side in April of 2013 is, at its core, a case about the complete and devastating failure of that most basic obligation, and about the legal doctrine that holds adults accountable not only for what they do, but for what they deliberately choose not to do when a child's life is in their hands. The West Ridge neighborhood, sometimes called West Rogers Park, is one of Chicago's most ethnically and culturally diverse communities. Located on the city's far north side, it is a neighborhood of apartment buildings and small businesses, of families who have put down roots across generations, of the particular urban texture that defines Chicago's North Side. It is a neighborhood where children grow up, where families navigate the ordinary and extraordinary challenges of city life, and where the events of April 11th, 2013 created a wound that the community has never fully stopped feeling. Angelina Rodriguez was 5 months old. 5 months. She had been in the world long enough to begin recognizing faces, to respond to sound, to experience the first dim awareness of safety and warmth. She was completely dependent on the adults in her life for everything, for nourishment, for warmth, for the most basic protection that every infant requires simply to survive. She had no ability to call for help, to escape danger, or to communicate distress beyond the natural expressions available to a baby her age. She was, in every meaningful sense, entirely at the mercy of the people responsible for her care. On April 11th, 2013, Angelina was in the care of her mother, Angela Petrov, and her mother's boyfriend. What occurred in the residence that night, as established through the evidence presented in the subsequent Cook County criminal proceedings, was an act of shocking cruelty directed at a 5-month-old infant. Petrov's boyfriend smothered the baby, applying pressure that deprived Angelina of the ability to breathe, with the stated aim of stopping her from crying. Angela Petrov was present. She witnessed what was being done to her 5-month-old daughter, and she did nothing to stop it. According to the prosecution's account, presented to and accepted by the Cook County Court, the couple then engaged in sexual activity and went to sleep, while Angelina Rodriguez, 5 months old, was in the process of dying. The infant did not survive. It is worth pausing on that sequence of events, not for the purpose of sensationalizing it, but because the legal and moral questions it raises are at the heart of why this case matters beyond its immediate facts. Angela Petrov did not, according to the prosecution, directly administer the harm that took Angelina's life. But she was there. She saw. She had the capacity to intervene, to call for help, to do any one of 100 things that might have saved her daughter's life. She chose to do none of them. And under Illinois law, specifically under the legal theory known as accountability, that choice made her as legally responsible for Angelina's death as if she had acted directly. The theory of accountability in Illinois criminal law holds that a person who aids, abets, agrees, or attempts to aid another in the planning or commission of a crime can be held criminally responsible for that crime as if they had committed it themselves. The doctrine is designed precisely for situations like this one, situations where a person does not act directly, but whose deliberate inaction or facilitation makes a criminal outcome possible or inevitable. Prosecutors in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office applied that doctrine to Angela Petrov's case with full force. Angela Petrov was charged in Cook County with first-degree murder under the accountability theory. The legal proceedings that followed examined the evidence in the case, physical findings, the timeline of events on the night of April 11th, witness accounts, and the documented behavior of both Petrov and her boyfriend in the hours during and following Angelina's death. The case proceeded through Cook County Circuit Court and resulted, in 2015, in a conviction and a sentence of 75 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. 75 years. A sentence that reflected the gravity of what had happened to Angelina Rodriguez and the court's unambiguous judgment about Angela Petrov's role in it. The case did not end there. The Illinois Appellate Court revisited aspects of the legal proceedings, issuing an amended opinion as recently as August of 2023, a decade after Angelina's death, demonstrating the legal complexity and the enduring significance of the accountability framework applied in this prosecution. The appellate review process, while technical in its focus, also served as a continued affirmation of the principle that witnesses to harm, particularly parents witness to harm directed at their own children, cannot shelter behind the passive nature of their role to escape accountability. 75 years. Angela Petrov will spend the defining decades of her life inside the Illinois Department of Corrections as a direct consequence of what she chose to do, and what she chose not to do, on the night of April 11th, 2013. Angelina Rodriguez was 5 months old. She lived for 5 months in a world that owed her decades more. The legal system's response to her death has been, by any measure, one of the most significant accountability outcomes in the history of Cook County's prosecution of crimes against children. For advocates who work in the child welfare and domestic violence prevention spaces, Angelina's case is a permanent reminder that harm to children does not always announce itself loudly. It can exist in the silence of a person who sees and does not speak. The law has something to say about that silence. And so does the community that carries Angelina Rodriguez in its memory. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every view, every subscription, every comment tells these children that they are not forgotten. Case 5, Aurionah-Rakii-Karie Parker White, May 28, 2025, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There are calls that arrive at emergency dispatch centers that stop the entire room. Calls that cut through the background noise of a busy communications center and cause every person within earshot to turn their attention to a single voice, a single address, a single unfolding situation. The call that came in from the Greater Grand Crossing and Englewood area of Chicago's South Side on May 28, 2025, was one of those calls. It did not come from a neighbor reporting something suspicious. It did not come from a family member raising an alarm. It came, indirectly, from a tow truck driver, a working man making his rounds through a South Side neighborhood, who looked out of his cab window and saw something on the street in front of him that no person driving through a residential neighborhood on a spring morning should ever have to see. 3 children, a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, in the street, injured, alone. Greater Grand Crossing is a neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, a community with a long history, with deep roots, with the kind of generational presence that defines much of Chicago's residential landscape. Englewood, adjacent to it, is one of Chicago's most frequently discussed neighborhoods in the context of community investment and public safety, a community whose residents have, for decades, organized and advocated for the resources and support that every Chicago neighborhood deserves. On a late May morning in 2025, a street in that community became the location of a scene that emergency responders and investigators would describe as among the most distressing they had encountered. The tow truck driver who discovered the 3 children did not hesitate. He gathered the injured children, ages 1, 3, and 5, and transported them to a nearby hospital. All 3 were alive. All 3 had sustained injuries to their wrists that required immediate medical attention. That a civilian who happened to be in the right place at the right moment became the person responsible for getting those children to safety is a detail that should not pass without acknowledgement. In the absence of any other intervention on that morning, that driver's decision to act may have been the reason all 3 children survived. Responding law enforcement officers and investigators working with the Chicago Police Department began the process of establishing what had happened and where the children had come from. The investigation led them to Aurionah-Rakii-Karie Parker White, the mother of the 3 children. Prosecutors, in the charging documents filed in Cook County, alleged that Parker White had inflicted the injuries on her own children, her 1-year-old, her 3-year-old, and her 5-year-old. According to the prosecution's account, Parker White reportedly stated that she had been feeling overwhelmed and had wanted to, in her own reported words, make her children go to heaven. Aurionah-Rakii-Karie Parker White was charged in Cook County with 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. As of the production of this documentary, she is in custody and awaiting trial. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and the full adjudication of the charges against her has not yet been completed. The facts alleged in the charging documents have not yet been tested through the complete trial process, and Parker White, like all defendants in the American legal system, is presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by a court of law. What is not in question is the condition of 3 small children who were found in a Chicago street on a spring morning, injured and in need of emergency care. What is not in question is that a stranger's decision to stop and act may have been the difference between life and something far worse. And what is not in question is that the Cook County criminal justice system is now in the process of determining accountability for what is alleged to have happened to those children on May 28, 2025. The case has drawn attention from child welfare advocates and mental health professionals who emphasize that parental crisis, the overwhelming, suffocating weight of caregiving under conditions of isolation, poverty, trauma, or untreated mental illness, is a real and serious phenomenon that communities and support systems must be equipped to address before it reaches a breaking point. The alleged statement that Parker White made about being overwhelmed is, in the view of many advocates, a window into a kind of suffering that, if it had been identified and addressed earlier, might have led to a completely different outcome for everyone involved. This is not said to excuse any action that may have resulted in harm to children. It is said because the prevention of future tragedies requires an honest examination of the conditions that make them possible. Access to mental health support, to crisis intervention, to community-based resources for parents in acute distress. These are not optional additions to a functioning child welfare system. They are essential components of it. The 3 children at the center of this case survived. They received medical care. They are alive. The legal system will do its work in the Cook County Circuit Court. And the broader community, the advocates, the policymakers, the neighbors, the people who believe that no child should ever be found alone and injured in the street, will continue to do theirs. If you or someone you know is a parent experiencing a crisis, please reach out. The National Parent Helpline is available at 1-855-42-72255. Help exists. Crisis does not have to become tragedy. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Stories like this one, especially the ones that are still unfolding, deserve witnesses. Case 6, Surah Amon, July 18, 2025, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There are tragedies that unfold in public, in front of witnesses, under an open sky, in places where people gather to find peace and relief from the pressures of daily life, and whose public nature makes them, in some ways, even more difficult to process than crimes that occur behind closed doors. The events at South Shore Beach on the shore of Lake Michigan on July 18, 2025 are of that nature. A summer day, a public beach, families present, and a moment of catastrophic crisis that took the life of a 1-year-old boy named Sir Watson before anyone who was there could fully understand what they were witnessing. South Shore is a neighborhood on Chicago's south side that runs along the western bank of Lake Michigan. South Shore Beach, the stretch of lakefront that belongs to this community, is the kind of place that Chicagoans seek out during the summer months for relief from the heat of the city, for the particular calm that comes from standing near a large body of water, for the pleasure of an afternoon that belongs only to rest and recreation. On a summer weekend, it is a place of families, of children playing in the water, of people from the surrounding neighborhoods enjoying one of Chicago's most accessible and beloved public spaces. On July 18, 2025, Surah Amon was at South Shore Beach with her 1-year-old son, Sir Watson. What happened on that beach on that afternoon is alleged, in the charging documents filed by Cook County prosecutors, to have been the direct result of a severe mental health crisis. According to the prosecution's account, and according to the accounts of witnesses who were present on the beach that day, Amon took her 1-year-old son into the waters of Lake Michigan. Sir Watson did not come back out of the water alive. He was 1 year old. Beachgoers who were present described what they witnessed in terms that convey both the horror of the immediate events and the mental health crisis that appeared to be driving them. According to multiple witness accounts, Amon was heard screaming, proclaiming aloud what she had done and expressing a desire to die herself. Emergency services were contacted immediately by witnesses at the scene. Responding personnel arrived to find a situation that was simultaneously a medical emergency, a potential act of danger, and a scene of profound human tragedy. Surah Amon was taken into custody. Sir Watson, 1 year old, did not survive. Cook County prosecutors charged Amon with first-degree murder. She was held without bond pending trial, a determination made by the Cook County Court based on the nature of the charge and the circumstances of the alleged offense. The legal proceedings are ongoing as of the time of this documentary. The case has prompted a significant and necessary conversation about maternal mental health, about the ways in which mental health crises can manifest in acute and devastating ways, and about the responsibility of communities and systems to identify and support individuals who are showing signs of severe psychological distress before those crises become irreversible tragedies. Mental health professionals and advocates who commented on the case in the days following Sir Watson's death were careful to emphasize that the existence of a mental health crisis does not remove legal accountability, but that it does demand examination of the systems that existed around this family, of what support was or was not available, and of what might have been done differently. Sir Watson was 1 year old. He was a baby boy who had barely had the chance to experience the world. The specific loss of a child that young, a child who has only just begun to develop awareness and connection, who has no capacity whatsoever to protect himself or to understand what is happening to him, carries a weight that is difficult to put into language. His life mattered. His brief time in the world mattered. And the circumstances of his death deserve the full, serious, and compassionate examination that the Cook County criminal justice system and the broader public health and mental health communities are, in different ways, now conducting. Mental health crises are real. Postpartum and ongoing maternal mental health challenges are real. And the resources available to individuals in crisis, if they are known, if they are accessible, if they reach people before the worst outcomes occur, can make a decisive difference. The National Maternal Mental Health Hotline is available at 1-8339-4-35746, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sir Watson deserved his life. His story is told here with the full dignity that every child, every person, deserves. The legal process will continue in Cook County. The broader work of prevention belongs to all of us. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every story told here is a child remembered. Do not let Sir Watson be forgotten. Case 7, Jannie Perry, December 29th through 30th, 2021, Lake County Circuit Court, North Chicago, Illinois. There are criminal cases that, when the full set of facts is laid out in a courtroom and presented to a judge and jury, produce a silence that communicates more than words can. Cases where the accumulation of detail, the sequence of events, the choices made and not made, the suffering endured by someone who had no power to escape it, becomes something that the room receives with a gravity that no verbal response can adequately match. The case of Jannie Perry is one of those cases. It is a case that began in a North Chicago apartment on the final days of 2021 and ended, in the most tragic and irreversible way, with the discovery of a 6-year-old boy's remains in a state he had never lived in, left in an alley, alone, as if he had never mattered to anyone at all. He mattered. He mattered enormously. And the legal system that ultimately held his mother accountable has ensured, at a minimum, that Jannie Perry's name is permanently attached to a record of justice. North Chicago is a small city in Lake County, Illinois, located approximately 35 miles north of downtown Chicago, nestled between Waukegan to the north and Winthrop Harbor to the northeast, and separated from the suburban communities of the broader North Shore area. It is a community with a substantial working-class population, a significant military presence due to its proximity to Naval Station Great Lakes, and the kind of tight-knit residential texture that defines smaller Illinois municipalities adjacent to the Chicago metropolitan area. The apartment where Jannie Perry lived with his mother, Jannie Perry, in the final days of December 2021 was, to all outward appearances, a home like many others on a street like many others. Jannie Perry was 6 years old. He was a first grader, or near enough to be one. A boy at the age when children are discovering the world through school and play and the 1,000 small adventures that make up early childhood. He was the age when a child begins to form memories that will carry into adulthood, begins to develop the sense of self that will define him for the rest of his life. He should have had the rest of his life. He had, instead, the final days of December 2021 inside an apartment in North Chicago with a mother who, the evidence would later establish beyond any legal doubt, treated him with a cruelty that defies easy comprehension. On the night of December 29th through the early hours of December 30th, 2021, Jannie Perry subjected Jannie to a severe cold shower as punishment. The stated reason, according to prosecutorial filings in the Lake County case, was that Jannie had taken food from the refrigerator. He was 6 years old. He had taken food. This was the act for which he was punished with a cold shower that caused him to lose consciousness and ultimately cost him his life. When Jannie became unresponsive, when it became apparent that something was profoundly, medically wrong, Jannie Perry did not call for emergency assistance. She did not seek help. She did not take her 6-year-old son to a hospital or call 911 or knock on a neighbor's door. The boy who had lost consciousness was denied the medical intervention that might have saved him. He did not survive. And then, in an action that added a layer of horrifying deliberateness to an already catastrophic series of events, Jannie's body was transported out of state and left in an alleyway in Indiana. His remains were discovered there, far from North Chicago, far from the apartment where he had lived, far from anyone who might have known his name or his face or the particular way that 6-year-olds carry themselves when they are walking to school on a winter morning. The investigation that followed Damari's discovery involved coordination between Illinois and Indiana law enforcement agencies, the identification of the remains, and the painstaking reconstruction of the sequence of events that had led from a North Chicago apartment to an Indiana alley. Lake County law enforcement and prosecutors worked through the evidence with the thoroughness that a case of this gravity demanded. Jannie Perry was charged in Lake County Circuit Court with first-degree murder and related offenses. The case proceeded through the Lake County criminal justice system over the months and years that followed, building toward the legal reckoning that Damari's death demanded. In April of 2026, on April 2nd specifically, Jannie Perry was sentenced to 45 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. The sentence was the Lake County Circuit Court's formal, permanent, and unambiguous statement about the worth of Damari Perry's life and the magnitude of what his mother had chosen to do to him. 45 years. Jannie Perry will be an elderly woman before she is eligible to see the outside of an Illinois correctional facility. The sentencing, coming as recently as April of this year, represented the culmination of a legal process that spanned more than 4 years from the night Damari lost his life to the moment accountability was formally imposed. Damari Perry was 6 years old. He had taken food from a refrigerator, the most human, the most ordinary, the most forgivable thing a hungry child can do. He was punished for it with his life. The Lake County criminal justice system, the law enforcement professionals who investigated the case, the prosecutors who built it, and the judge who imposed sentence have all, in their respective roles, done what justice required. What remains, always in cases like this one, is the work of remembering, of saying a child's name, of insisting that he was here and that he mattered and that what happened to him must never be forgotten. If you are concerned about a child's welfare in your community, please contact the Illinois DCFS hotline at 1-800-252-2873. You may be the one person who makes the difference. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Damari Perry deserved a full life. The least we can give him now is our attention and our memory. Case 8, Simone Austin, September 26, 2020, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There are criminal cases that become defining moments for a neighborhood, moments that crystallize in a single horrifying event, the intersection of mental health crisis, community vulnerability, and the devastating consequences of inadequate support systems. The East Garfield Park neighborhood on Chicago's west side has experienced more than its share of tragedy over the decades, but the events of September 26, 2020, on a residential block in that community, created a scar that its residents have been carrying ever since. Not because tragedy was new to East Garfield Park, but because of who suffered that day and how young she was, and the fact that she was harmed by the one person in the world who should have been most absolutely certain to protect her. East Garfield Park is one of Chicago's most historically significant and simultaneously most underserved West Side communities. It is a neighborhood that has faced decades of disinvestment, population loss, and the compounding challenges that accompany long-term economic marginalization. It is also a neighborhood of extraordinary resilience, of community organizations, block clubs, churches, and residents who have worked tirelessly to build stability and opportunity in the face of systemic neglect. The people of East Garfield Park deserve resources, investment, and support. The children of East Garfield Park deserve to be safe. Serenity Arrington was 5 years old on September 26, 2020. She lived in East Garfield Park. She had an 8-year-old sister. She was 5 years old, which means she was at the age of beginnings, beginning to read, beginning to understand the world, beginning to form the earliest layers of a life that should have stretched decades in front of her. She was completely without any capacity to protect herself from what was coming. She was, in every sense, dependent on the adults in her world for her safety. On the morning of September 26, 2020, in the presence of Serenity's 8-year-old sister, a child who was forced to witness something no child should ever have to see, Simone Austin, Serenity's mother, subjected her 5-year-old daughter to a sudden and severe attack using a serrated kitchen knife. Serenity sustained serious injuries to her throat. She was 5 years old. What happened next added to the complexity of a case that was already, in its initial facts, among the most distressing in Chicago's recent history. Austin carried Serenity, her injured 5-year-old daughter, outside of the residence and lay down beside her on the sidewalk. She remained there with the child until police arrived. It was not an act of flight. It was not an attempt at concealment. It was the behavior of a person in the grip of a profound psychological crisis. A person who had done something catastrophic and was, in the aftermath, unable or unwilling to do anything other than remain at the scene with the child she had harmed. Emergency responders arrived to find Serenity Arrington in critical condition. She was transported for emergency medical care. Simone Austin was taken into custody by Chicago Police Department officers at the scene. Serenity Arrington did not survive her injuries. She was 5 years old. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office charged Simone Austin with first-degree murder. The case that followed has been one of the more legally complex in recent Cook County history, not because the facts of what occurred are in serious dispute, but because the question of Austin's mental state, her psychological condition at the time of the offense, and her competency to stand trial and to assist in her own defense, has been the central issue around which the proceedings have turned. Cook County courts have ordered and received multiple psychological and psychiatric evaluations of Austin over the course of the years since September of 2020. The ongoing mental health evaluation process reflects both the seriousness with which the Cook County court system approaches questions of competency and criminal responsibility and the genuine complexity of cases where severe mental illness and serious criminal conduct intersect. As of the time of this documentary, the legal proceedings involving Simone Austin remain ongoing. The case has not yet reached final adjudication. The Cook County Circuit Court continues to navigate the legal and medical questions that the case presents. Serenity Arrington's family, her sister, who witnessed what happened that September morning, and the other people who loved her, are living in the space between the event and its legal resolution. That space is not easy to inhabit. It requires a kind of sustained grief and sustained patience that no family should be required to maintain. The case has also become, for mental health advocates in Chicago, a reference point in discussions about what happens when severe, untreated, or inadequately treated mental illness exists in a home where children are present. The conversation is not about excusing harm to children. It is about prevention, about identifying individuals in crisis before crisis becomes catastrophe, about ensuring that the mental health resources available in communities like East Garfield Park are genuinely accessible and genuinely adequate to the need. Serenity Arrington's 8-year-old sister saw something on the morning of September 26, 2020, that no 8-year-old should ever carry. Her well-being, her healing, her path forward in the years since that morning. These are part of the full human cost of what happened in East Garfield Park that day. 2 children were harmed on that September morning. 1 lost her life. 1 was left to live with the memory. The legal system will complete its work in the case of Simone Austin. Cook County's process, however complex, however long, is built on the principle that every life matters and that accountability, in one form or another, must follow from the loss of a child. Serenity Arrington was 5 years old. She is not forgotten here. Mental health resources are available. For Chicago residents in mental health crisis, the Thresholds Crisis Line is available at 312-846-4000. Help us there. Reaching out matters. Please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Serenity deserved her life. Let her be remembered. Case 9, Marisol Vazquez, December 20th, 2024, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. There is a particular pain that attaches to cases involving the very youngest victims. Children not yet old enough to speak in full sentences, not yet old enough to navigate the world independently, not yet old enough to understand what vulnerability is or that they carry it everywhere they go. Cases involving children in the earliest years of life confront us with the most complete and most defenseless innocence that exists in human experience. They compel a response, legal, moral, communal, that goes beyond the ordinary parameters of criminal accountability and reaches into something deeper. A recognition that the protection of the most vulnerable is not optional. that it is the most basic measure of what a community is and what it values. The case of a 21-month-old girl in East Garfield Park, a child whose name and image deserve to be protected even as her story is told, is a case of that nature. East Garfield Park, the same West Side Chicago neighborhood that appears earlier in this documentary in the context of Serenity Arrington's story. A community that has endured more than its share of tragedy and that deserves, along with accountability for those who cause harm, the investment and support that would make such harm less likely. The proximity in this documentary of two separate cases from the same neighborhood is not a coincidence born of editorial selection. It is a reflection of the concentrated challenges that have historically defined communities like East Garfield Park and the concentrated grief those challenges can produce. Marisol Vazquez was a resident of East Garfield Park. Her 21-month-old daughter was, on December 20th, 2024, found unresponsive in the family's residence. Emergency services were contacted. Responding personnel arrived and found a toddler, 21 months old, barely past babyhood, in a condition that required immediate emergency medical intervention. The child did not survive. The medical examination and autopsy that followed were conducted by the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. The findings were definitive and unambiguous. The cause of death was established as manual strangulation. A 21-month-old child had died as the result of a deliberate physical act. The medical evidence made that clear with the kind of clinical precision that leaves no room for alternative interpretation. Chicago Police Department investigators, working the case through the process established for child fatality investigations, developed Marisol Vazquez as the subject of their inquiry. According to the charging documents filed in Cook County by the state's attorney's office, Vazquez gave investigators an account that included a confession to the act that ended her daughter's life. The reported explanation she offered, that she had heard voices directing her to act as she had, introduced, from the very beginning of the case, the question of mental health and its role in what had occurred on December 20th, 2024. Marisol Vazquez was charged in January of 2025 with first-degree murder in the death of her daughter. She was taken into custody and has remained there since. The legal proceedings are ongoing in Cook County Circuit Court. As with other cases in this documentary that involve allegations of mental illness as a contributing factor, the full adjudication of the charges against Vazquez has not yet been completed. The American legal system's presumption of innocence applies. The legal process will run its course. What is not uncertain is the death of a 21-month-old child. What is not uncertain is that a toddler, a little girl barely into the second year of her life, did not survive December 20th, 2024. What is not uncertain is that a family, a community, and a criminal justice system are now in the long and difficult process of determining what accountability looks like and what justice requires. The intersection of mental health and child welfare that this case raises, the alleged experience of hearing voices, the question of whether and what kind of psychiatric care existed or was accessible for Vazquez, the structural questions about how communities identify and support individuals in acute mental health distress, is a conversation that has become increasingly central to how Cook County and the city of Chicago approach child fatality cases. The presence of untreated or inadequately treated psychiatric illness in a home where young children live represents a risk that advocates say must be addressed with far greater urgency and far greater resources than the current system typically provides. This conversation is not academic. It is not theoretical. It is grounded in the death of a 21-month-old child in East Garfield Park on a December day in 2024. It is grounded in the grief of everyone who knew her. It is grounded in the work of every social worker, every mental health professional, every community advocate who understands that the gap between a person in crisis and the resources they need can be, and in cases like this one, may have been, the difference between life and death. The Cook County criminal justice system will complete its work in the case of Marisol Vazquez. The child at the center of this case, 21 months old, completely innocent, completely without any ability to protect herself, deserved her life. She is remembered here with the dignity and love that every child deserves, and with the hope that her story contributes, in whatever small way, to a community and a system that responds more quickly, more adequately, and more effectively to the people who need help before help becomes too late. If you or someone you know is experiencing symptoms of a mental health crisis, including hearing voices or experiencing thoughts that feel outside your control, please seek help immediately. In Chicago, the crisis line is available through the Illinois Mental Health Collaborative at 1-800-345-9049, 24 hours a day. You are not alone. Help is available. Please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every case here represents a life that mattered. Thank you for bearing witness. Case 10, Tamyra Anderson, November 21, 2024, Cook County Circuit Court, Chicago, Illinois. We close this documentary where it is most difficult to close, and most necessary to close, with the case of a 5-month-old infant named Marquis Johnson Jr. 5 months old, the same age as Angelina Rodriguez, whose story appears earlier in this documentary. Old enough to recognize his mother's voice. Old enough to feel the warmth of being held. Old enough to respond to the world around him with the particular, heartbreaking openness of a baby who has not yet learned that the world can harm him. Too young to protect himself from anything. Too young to ask for help. Too young to understand that what was happening to him was something that should never be allowed to happen to anyone, much less to someone who had barely arrived in the world. North Lawndale is a neighborhood on Chicago's west side. Like East Garfield Park, it is a community with deep historical roots, with a rich cultural and civic legacy, and with the accumulated weight of decades of disinvestment and the compounding challenges that accompany it. North Lawndale is also a community with extraordinary residents, people who have organized, advocated, built institutions, and refused, decade after decade, to allow their neighborhood to be defined solely by the difficulties it faces. The children of North Lawndale are part of that story. They deserve to be safe. They deserve to grow up. They deserve to be protected. On November 21, 2024, 5-month-old Marquis Johnson Jr. was in the care of his mother, Tamyra Anderson, in their North Lawndale home. The events of that day, and as investigators and medical professionals would later establish, the events of the days and weeks preceding it, resulted in injuries to Marquis that no 5-month-old infant should ever sustain, injuries that were both severe and, crucially, not the product of a single moment. When Marquis was brought to medical attention and examined by medical professionals, the findings were deeply disturbing to everyone involved in his care. The injuries documented by physicians and subsequently confirmed by autopsy findings from the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office included brain hemorrhages and retinal injuries of the kind associated with significant physical force, injuries that medical professionals characterized as consistent with chronic abuse. The word chronic is important here. It means not once. It means not a single incident. It means a pattern, a sustained period of harm directed at an infant who had no ability to communicate what was happening to him to anyone outside the walls of the home where he lived. Marquis Johnson Jr. did not survive his injuries. He was 5 months old. The Cook County Medical Examiner's findings established the cause and nature of his death with the medical precision that investigations of this kind demand and that accountability requires. Tamyra Anderson was charged in February of 2025 with first-degree murder in connection with the death of her son. She is currently in custody in Cook County. The legal proceedings are ongoing. As with other pending cases in this documentary, the full adjudication of the charges against Anderson has not yet been completed, and the presumption of innocence that applies to all defendants in the American criminal justice system applies here as well. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office is prosecuting the case, and the proceedings will continue through the Cook County Circuit Court. What the medical record established, what the autopsy findings documented, is that Marquis Johnson Jr. was a 5-month-old infant who sustained chronic physical harm over an extended period. That is the medical finding. That is what the examination of his small body revealed to the physicians and investigators responsible for understanding what had happened to him. And that finding, the word chronic, the evidence of a pattern, the implication that this did not happen once but happened again and again to a baby who could not tell anyone, is the thing that makes this case, in some ways, the most difficult in this documentary to narrate without stopping. Because there is something about the chronic nature of harm to an infant that forces a confrontation with the complete inadequacy of any language to address it. We can document. We can narrate. We can frame events within the structures of legal proceedings and medical findings and journalistic accountability. But somewhere beneath all of those structures is a 5-month-old baby who deserved to grow up in North Lawndale, deserved to learn to walk and talk and go to school, deserved to become whoever Marquis Johnson Jr. was going to be. And that baby is gone. And no sentence, no conviction, no legal outcome, however appropriate, however necessary, gives him back. What legal accountability can do, what the Cook County criminal justice system is in the process of doing in this case, is say, formally and permanently, and on the public record, that the harm done to Marquis Johnson Jr. matters. That his 5 months of life mattered. That the injuries documented in his medical record mattered. That the person or persons responsible for those injuries must answer for them in the most serious form available in a society governed by law. That is what accountability means. It is not restoration, but it is necessary. It is the minimum that justice requires. The case of Marquis Johnson Jr. also points to something broader, to the ongoing challenge of identifying infants who are at risk inside their homes before the worst outcomes occur. Infants cannot report abuse. They cannot call for help. They cannot tell a teacher or a neighbor or a pediatrician what is happening to them. The entire system of child protection as it applies to infants depends on the vigilance of every adult who comes into contact with a baby: physicians, nurses, social workers, family members, neighbors, and the willingness of those adults to ask difficult questions, raise concerns, and follow through when something does not seem right. The chronic nature of the harm documented in Marquis Jr.'s case raises questions about every interaction he had with the outside world during his 5 months of life, and about whether there were moments when the signs were present but the intervention did not follow. These are questions without easy answers. They are questions that the child welfare community, the medical community, and the Chicago public health establishment must continue to grapple with seriously and honestly in the interest of every infant in this city who is too young to speak for themselves. Marquis Johnson Jr. was 5 months old. He was someone's son, someone's grandson, someone's nephew. He had a name and a face and a small body that deserved to be held with care and protected with everything that the adults around him had to give. The law will do what the law can do. The rest belongs to us, to the communities, the institutions, the individuals who make up the web of protection that should surround every child from the moment they enter the world. To close this documentary, we offer this: 10 cases, 10 children, 10 stories of loss, of harm, of the places where systems failed and individuals failed and a child paid the price. These stories are told not to exploit suffering, not to sensationalize tragedy, not to generate outrage for its own sake. They are told because these children deserve to be remembered, because the families who love them deserve to know that the world has not moved on and forgotten, because the communities that produce these cases, and that also produce the investigators, prosecutors, advocates, and citizens who have fought for justice in each of them, deserve honest reckoning with what happened and serious commitment to making it less likely to happen again. Every child in this documentary was loved by someone. Every child in this documentary had a name. Every child in this documentary mattered. If you are a parent in crisis, overwhelmed, isolated, struggling under a weight that feels impossible to carry, please reach out before the weight becomes unbearable. The National Parent Helpline is available at 1-855-42-72255. You do not have to be alone with what you are carrying. Help exists. Reaching out is not weakness. It is the strongest thing you can do for yourself and for your children. If you have concerns about the welfare of a child in Illinois, please contact the DCFS Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline at 1-800-25-22873. Every call has the potential to change an outcome. Cold Case Hour is committed to telling these stories with dignity, with journalistic responsibility, and with the full weight of respect that every victim in every case deserves. We will continue to document, to remember, and to bear witness, because justice begins with knowing what happened, and because the children whose stories we tell here deserve to be known. If this documentary moved you, if it reminded you why stories like these must be told and why the children at the center of them must never be reduced to footnotes, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you never miss another documentary. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Your engagement is what makes this work possible. Your support is what keeps these children's memories alive. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. These children were real. Their stories matter. And they will not be forgotten here.